everyone, and welcome to Smoke&Spirits, episode 1. The latest in what I'm sure is a long line of YouTube channels started by people with a lot of time on their hands in these unfortunate times. Unless you don't have a lot of time on your hands and you happen to be an essential worker, in which case I say to you, please stay healthy and stay safe. In the meantime, I'd like to talk about something that I'm passionate about, which is Scotch. I am very much an enthusiast of the Islay single malt Scotches, and I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my favorites tonight, which is the Ardbeg Corryvreckan. I'm not really going to talk too much about how Scotch is made. I'm sure everybody out there has a sort of a general idea. If not, you can find a bunch of resources online where a lot of people with a lot more knowledge than mine can explain that in greater detail. But if you are a fan of reading, I highly recommend this book by Andrew Jefford called Peat, Smoke and Spirit. It's a very exhaustive read, and that by no means is that a bad thing. This is an excellent book which will provide a wealth of detail for anyone who really wants to get an in-depth understanding of the Islay single malt Scotches. As well, this book is definitely worth a look by Fiona Rintoul and Conrad Borkowski. It's just beautiful photography called Whiskey Island, and of course Islay means island as well. So where is Islay exactly? And again, a quick Google search will answer that question for you. But it's an island just off the coast of mainland Scotland. And the Islay single malts are a passion of mine because, like most of you, I imagine, I associate a lot of poetry and a lot of imagery and a lot of romance with the Scotches that I appreciate. So again, the one I'd like to talk about tonight is Ardbeg Corryvreckan. And the Ardbeg distillery lies in the southeast corner of Islay itself. It's certainly a very storied distillery with a long and illustrious history. One of the quirkier things about Ardbeg is how they name their expression. So certainly Corryvreckan, for anyone who doesn't speak Gaelic or who's unfamiliar with the nomenclature or the terminology or the lingo, Corryvreckan is a place. It's actually a natural phenomenon. It's a naturally occurring whirlpool. And again, because I do get sucked into a little bit of the romance and the poetry of the place and the history of it, you can sort of imagine the turbulence, the fury that inspired men and women from long ago to conjure up stories about these naturally occurring phenomenon. And I'm going to be very honest with you. I like to read the box. When it comes to getting a new Scotch and really experiencing it, I start with the box, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. There's a bit of a sort of a blurb on the back side of it where they talk about some of the history and some of the inspiration for that particular expression. They also talk about the tasting notes, and of course they give you the alcohol by volume for that particular expression. And let me tell you, when it comes to Ardbeg Corryvreckan, it is not for the faint of heart. Much like the whirlpool that inspired it, this is in fact a very heady, a very peaty, a very intense experience. And in fact, that's one of the very first tasting notes here is turbulent. But first, I'd like to sort of go through this little blurb with you guys if you haven't had the opportunity to taste this particular expression. Again, I highly recommend it, but let's take it from the top. So again, as I said, the Ardbeg distillery lies on the most southerly part of Islay, on the rugged shores of the Atlantic Ocean. To the north of Islay and Jura is the world's second largest whirlpool, the Corryvreckan. This thunderous, seething cauldron is named for the Viking prince Brecon, who it is said met his watery end there. This is the legend of Corryvreckan, but not as you have heard it before. Brecon fell in love with an Islay princess, the daughter of the Lord of the Isles. To prove his devotion, the brave suitor was challenged to survive 3 nights in Keelik's whirlpool. Keelik is an ancient goddess who was sometimes represented as a young woman or an old woman and would sometimes shift her guise during the course of her encounters with mortals. She's also known as the goddess of winter, but again, not being a historian, I'm not quite sure where that part comes into this particular legend, but let's carry on. To prove his devotion, the brave suitor was challenged to survive 3 nights in Keelik's whirlpool. He sailed into the perilous maelstrom, but the 3 ropes he carried to anchor his vessel were pulled asunder. Thus, says the legend, Brecon perished beneath the whirlpool that now bears his name, Corryvreckan. But it's not so, for Keelik Bear, the ancient goddess who guards the whirlpool, chose life for the prince and took him to her watery lair where he has been sleeping. Now she returns him to us. What form will he take? Ardbeg Corryvreckan is a heady, intense, and powerful expression. Swirling aromas and torrents of deep, peppery, peaty tastes lurk beneath the surface of this beautifully balanced dram, the epitome of Ardbeg. Certainly, if you are an enthusiast or an aficionado of the Islay single malts, you will be very familiar with Ardbeg. And to say that they put out a consistently balanced dram is a bit of an understatement. I'll start with Corryvreckan tonight, but it's my intent to carry on with more of the Ardbeg expressions with future episodes of this show. So I did mention a little bit about the alcohol by volume, and when Ardbeg says that this is a heady expression, very intense, very turbulent, they're not joking. So this is a 57.1% alcohol by volume. And if you're not accustomed to that, it can be a little bit overpowering. So I've selected a Copita glass, as I like to do when I try a new Scotch, because I really want to get the most out of my first tasting, or if I haven't had it for a while, as in the case of the Corryvreckan here, I like to sort of reacquaint myself with it and really turn it into an experience. So part of the tasting of any Scotch is going to be engaging all of your senses. And certainly it's very pleasant to see how the light reflects through the liquid. You can see the legs that it leaves behind as you move the glass around. And of course, if you've done a little bit of reading on how Scotch is made, you'll know that sugar is a very important part of the process. And because the sugar is an important part of the process, you'll start to see a sticky residue along the inside of the glass. And a lot of people call that legs. Whether or not a dram has strong legs or sort of thinner and runnier ones, I've never found makes a heck of a lot of difference to me. Just a point of interest if it's something that you're interested in sort of filing away in the old databanks there. But looking into the depths of this particular dram, I very much appreciate the burnished bronze notes. There's sort of almost like a caramel color to it as well, which promises very great things. So one of the great things about the Copita glass as well is the longer stem, which allows you to sort of hold it and not have your body heat touching the bulb of the glass, which again, whether or not you believe in that sort of thing or whether or not you even care about that sort of thing, it's something that somebody evidently cared about enough to create a glass which allowed you to keep your hand away from there. The other theory behind that is if your hands sort of had a certain scent to them, you would keep them further away from your nose so as not to contaminate the tasting process of, or the nosing process rather, of this particular liquid. Although I would argue that probably if your hands are that smelly or that dirty, you should probably wash your hands before you carry on with whatever it is that you're doing. So you'll see that the bulb of the Copita glass is wider at the base, and you'll see the same sort of architecture in the Glencairn glass, which is another very commonly used glass for tasting Scotch. It tapers up to a narrow opening at the top to sort of focus those aromas toward your nose. And when I'm going to get into my nosing, I like to sort of start down here, so you can sort of hold your glass as far sideways as you can without actually spilling the liquid, and you get greater surface area to give off more of those odors and funnel them out there. With anything that's this intense and this heady, I like to sort of give it its space a little bit. I like to start above the top rim of the glass and start nosing from there. And with this Scotch, as with most Scotches actually, I do detect a lot of those stone fruit notes, a lot of the dark fruit notes, which is in fact a tasting note that's indicated on the box. And this is another reason why I like to read the box, honestly. I know a lot of people will sort of swear by not being led down a particular path, but I like to allow the individuals who created this to give me something to go on when I start with this. And of course, you may or may not agree with what the tasting notes are, but it's nice to have sort of something to mull over when you're nosing it. In this case, the dark fruits, the stone fruits. The other thing they talk about is how turbulent that is. And certainly if you start from the top and sort of make your way down into the glass itself, you get that wood and you get that peat, and there is, I think for me, just a hint of brine, which is something that's, I don't want to say fairly common, but it's one of the things people look for in the Islay single malts, and certainly it's something that I appreciate. Another favorite of mine is the Lafroig quarter cask, and to say that that one is briny for me would be a radical understatement. But nosing this one, I get the fruits, I get a pleasant intensity. I don't know that I would call it turbulent right now at this point in time because it hasn't made its way into my mouth yet, but we'll check on that in a moment. So what I like about a lot of the Islay single malts is a lot of them tend to have a certain viscosity to the mouthfeel. So that's going to be the other thing. So consult whatever guide you will. You'll probably find ample notes in there about the taste experience of Scotch, or many other spirits for that matter. But I'll start with the nosing. You'll sort of look at the color, and this is kind of why I say for me it's a full sensory experience. You'll get into the color of it, and when you start drinking it, they'll talk about the mouthfeel. So to get the real sense of that, it's really important to sort of get it all around in there, sort of chew on it a little bit and take your time with it. Allow it to hit all the different parts of your mouth before you actually swallow it down. So with this one, definitely there's a little bit of viscosity to it, a little bit of oiliness to it, not unpleasant. You really get a sense of those bright notes sort of poking through, the same way that, again, because I do get wrapped up in the poetry of this, the same way that you might see what I imagine to be rays of sunlight poking through a stormy, sort of bruised sky over Islay, over the Corryvreckan. So I like to imagine myself maybe sitting there on the coast and drinking a dram like this one. Now, the other thing that you'll see on the bottle is that they talk about a long peppery finish, and that is certainly in evidence here. Again, because the Islay single malts are something that I'm exceptionally passionate about. I like all of the things that make them what they are, and one of those things is the intensity. Ardbeg, Corryvreckan, Lafroig quarter cask, other expressions from Ardbeg or Lagavulin. We're going to take a look at a lot of, in fact, we're going to take a look at all of the distilleries on Islay before I'm done with this this channel that I've started. But they all have that sort of, that really deep sort of wealth and complexity of flavor. And this is why I sort of gravitated towards it. I started my journey into Scotch with the Macallan Gold, which was certainly a very pleasant dram. But as I sort of made my way further down the rabbit hole, this is where I found myself sort of spiritually on that island off the west coast of Scotland, which is renowned for producing some phenomenal single malts. So the peppery finish is there. By now it has faded. It's left me with a little bit of caramel, a little bit of sweetness, but enough of a slight bitterness to almost evoke the ocean maelstrom that it's named after. So very evocative, very pleasant, and certainly a beautiful and well-balanced dram, much as the tasting notes and the literature seem to indicate. So if you have the opportunity, you will not be disappointed in the Ardbeg Corryvreckan, if that's your thing. If you're new to tasting scotches, have a go at it. Try it with water, without water. I like to add a little bit of water to something, especially when you're talking about 57.1% alcohol by volume, because that is pretty heady, and those sort of the intensity of the ethanol can really zap your taste buds. And you're gonna want to open it up for yourself when you're spending time with a single malt, when you spend money on a single malt, you want to get the most out of it. So certainly it behooves you to open it up and get the full range of flavors and aromas from your dram. So try it for yourself, try it with a little bit of water, try it without water, and see what you think. You won't be disappointed. If you are a novice, if you are an initiate to the world of single malts, then welcome. Maybe sort of go slow when it comes to something like this, but certainly I think you'll appreciate it. And again, I don't get any sort of financial or material compensations for anything that I talk about on my show. But if you are, whether you're a novice or whether you're a veteran of the world of single malt Scotch, have a look at these two books. I think for me, they've been a very interesting read, and certainly I spent many evenings with them while sipping on a dram. So that's it for my first episode. I hope you enjoyed, and until the next episode, when we'll look at the Ardbeg Ugadal, stay thirsty.